The desert swallowed sound. That was the first thing Lieutenant Commander James Anvil Harrison noticed as he dragged himself through the forward and operating base's gates, his men staggering behind him. In the mountains, the firefight had been deafening, RPGs screaming overhead, the staccato chatter of AK-47s, the desperate shouts of his men. But here in the gathering dusk of Outpost Condor, the silence felt oppressive, broken only by the labored breathing of his wounded team. Blood darkened the sleeve of Harrison's combat uniform, the makeshift tourniquet already soaked through. He didn't look at it, couldn't afford to. Not while half his team remained trapped in the valley below, surrounded by Taliban fighters who'd seemed to materialize from the very rocks themselves. "Get the wounded to medical," Harrison ordered, his voice rough from hours of shouting commands over gunfire. "Masters, Rodriguez, secure our equipment. Sullivan with me." Master Chief Petty Officer Frank Grizzly Sullivan fell in beside him. At 45, Sullivan was older than most men still running combat missions with SEAL Team 6. His weathered face bore the map of every deployment since the Cold War's final days, Panama, Kuwait, Kosovo, and now this godforsaken corner of Afghanistan. The gray at his temples had earned him the Grizzly call sign as much as his bear-like build. "Sir, you should get that arm looked at," Sullivan said, eyeing the blood-soaked sleeve. Harrison ignored him. "We need comms with command, now." They moved across the compound, past concrete barriers and concertina wire. Outpost Condor wasn't much a collection of prefabricated structures, sandbagged walls, and a small airstrip barely deserving of the name. Originally built as a forward refueling point, it had evolved into an intelligence gathering station before being largely abandoned 3 months ago when the Air Force Tactical Unit pulled out. Now it housed only a skeleton crew of support personnel, a rotating security detail, and as of 36 hours ago, Harrison's SEAL team. The command center occupied the largest structure, its interior bathed in the blue glow of monitors. Specialist Wilson looked up from his communication station as they entered, his expression grim. "Still nothing, Commander. SATCOM is completely down." Harrison's jaw tightened. "What about the backup systems?" "Dead. It's like something fried all the circuits simultaneously." Sullivan moved to the large tactical display dominating the center of the room. "Timeline, sir." "Communications went dark approximately 90 minutes ago," Wilson replied, "right after your team reported the ambush." Harrison absorbed this, the implications crystallizing. "This wasn't equipment failure. Someone wanted us isolated." "Inside job?" Sullivan asked, his voice dropping. "Or someone nearby with specialized equipment?" Harrison studied the tactical map where red markers indicated the last known positions of Lieutenant Michael Wolf Donovan and his half of the team. "Either way, we have men trapped in that valley with no backup and no air support." The mission had seemed straightforward: extract a State Department analyst whose convoy had been attacked en route to Kabul. Intelligence had identified the likely location, a compound in the Korangal Valley used by a mid-level Taliban commander with known al-Qaeda connections. The kind of mission SEAL Team 6 had performed dozens of times. What they hadn't expected was the welcoming committee, at least 60 heavily armed fighters, with advanced tactical knowledge positioned to cut off every escape route. Someone had been waiting for them. "How long do they have?" Sullivan asked quietly. Harrison calculated silently. "Ammunition for 3 hours of sustained engagement. Maybe 4 if they're conservative. After that..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The door opened, and Captain Lewis, the base commander, entered. A career logistics officer rather than a combat leader, Lewis looked perpetually uncomfortable in the forward operating environment. "Commander Harrison, what's the situation with your men?" Harrison gave him the abbreviated version: ambush communications, failure stranded operators. "We need to reach Central Command," Harrison concluded. "Request immediate air support, preferably an AC-130 gunship or A-10s for close air support." Lewis shifted uncomfortably. "Commander, even if we could reach Central Command, there's a problem. The nearest air assets are at Bagram, at least 2 hours away, assuming immediate authorization." "Which we can't get because comms are down," Sullivan growled. Harrison felt the weight of command pressing down on him, the lives of his men measured in minutes of ammunition and enemy advance. For a moment, his mind drifted back 18 years to the endless sand of Kuwait and Iraq during Desert Storm. He'd been a young ensign then, fresh from the academy, assigned to a forward naval intelligence unit. Their position had come under artillery fire from Iraqi forces. With communications cut, they'd been stranded until the distinctive sound of an A-10 Thunderbolt II split the air above them. The aircraft, nicknamed Warthog for its ungainly appearance, had made pass after pass, its GAU-E-8 Avenger cannon tearing through enemy positions with a sound like the sky itself being torn apart. Later, he'd met the pilot, a wiry captain with calm eyes, who'd explained that he'd diverted from another mission when he spotted the firefight. Sometimes, the pilot had said, you have to trust your gut over your orders. Harrison shook away the memory. What air assets do we have on base, Captain? Lewis blinked. None, Commander. When the Air Force pulled out, they took everything that could fly. Not quite everything, came a quiet voice from the doorway. All heads turned. A woman stood there, her Air Force utility uniform smudged with grease sleeves rolled to expose forearms, escorted with lean muscle. Staff Sergeant Catherine Kate Reynolds was part of the skeleton maintenance crew left behind. Most days she could be found troubleshooting generators or repairing communications equipment, keeping the outpost functioning despite limited resources. Early 30s, Harrison guessed, with brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. What do you mean, Staff Sergeant? Harrison asked. They left one bird behind, Reynolds said, stepping into the room. An A-10 in Hangar 3, engine trouble. They covered it with tarps and marked it for transport, but then the orders changed. Sullivan straightened. An A-10, here is it operational? Not officially, Reynolds replied. But I've been working on it during downtime. It'll fly. Hope flickered, but Harrison tamped it down. An aircraft without a pilot was just an expensive paperweight. Can you reach out to any Air Force personnel who might be transiting through the area? Reynolds held his gaze, something unspoken passing behind her eyes. No need, sir. Why's that? Because I can fly it. The room fell silent. Harrison studied her, searching for signs of bravado or exaggeration. He found none, just the steady gaze of someone stating a simple fact. Captain Lewis laughed nervously. Staff Sergeant, this isn't the time for... What did you fly? Harrison cut in, his voice low. Reynolds didn't hesitate. A-10 Thunderbolt II. 8 years. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Sullivan's eyes narrowed. You're maintenance personnel. Now I am, Reynolds acknowledged. I was reassigned 2 years ago. Harrison felt something stir in his gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive through a dozen operations gone sideways. Your call sign. For the first time, something flickered across Reynolds' face, a shadow of what might have been pain. Ghost Rider. Sullivan sucked in a breath. Harrison saw recognition dawn in the older man's eyes. Ghost Rider, Sullivan repeated slowly. 118 successful CAS missions over Iraq and Afghanistan. Set the record for confirmed tank kills during the push to Baghdad. His eyes hardened, then disappeared without explanation. Reynolds didn't confirm or deny it. She simply waited, her posture neither defensive nor challenging. Captain Lewis glanced between them, confused. I don't understand. If you're a pilot, why are you assigned to maintenance? That's not relevant to our current situation, Harrison said, his mind racing through implications and possibilities. What matters is whether Staff Sergeant Reynolds can fly that A-10 tonight in combat conditions to provide support for my stranded men. I can, Reynolds said simply. Sir, one of the younger SEALs interjected. Are we seriously considering this? We don't even know if she's qualified. Sullivan fixed the younger operator with a hard stare. Son, if she's who she says she is, she's more than qualified. Ghost Rider is a legend in close air support circles. Harrison moved to the tactical display. Show me the state of the aircraft, Reynolds. Reynolds stepped forward, using a stylus to indicate areas on the digital map. The GAU-8 cannon is fully operational. We have approximately 100 rounds of 30mm ammunition. 2 AGM-65 Maverick missiles, 4 MiG-82 500-pound bombs, and 6 rockets. The targeting systems are partially compromised. I'll need to make most approaches visually. The technical precision of her assessment silenced any remaining doubts about her familiarity with the aircraft. This wasn't someone who'd read a manual. This was a pilot who knew her weapon system intimately. Fuel status, Harrison pressed. Tanks at 82%. Enough for about 2 hours of operation, less if I need to engage in evasive maneuvers. Harrison turned to Sullivan. Get every piece of intelligence we have on enemy positions around Donovan's location. I want terrain maps, last known enemy movements, everything. On it, Sullivan nodded, moving to a computer terminal. Captain Lewis stepped closer, lowering his voice. Commander, I have to object to this course of action. This is highly irregular. We should continue attempting to restore communications and request official air support. Captain, Harrison replied quietly, in 3 hours I will have men dead or captured because we stood here debating protocols. I'm invoking Complan 8044, assuming tactical command of all assets on this base to prevent loss of American lives. Lewis paled. Contingency Plan 8044 was rarely invoked, but it granted Special Operations commanders extraordinary authority in emergency situations. He wouldn't challenge it, not without risking his career. Very well, Commander, but this will be in my report. I'm counting on it, Harrison replied. Now please ensure all non-essential personnel are confined to quarters. Operational security is paramount. As Lewis departed, Harrison turned back to Reynolds. Why are you really here? Staff Sergeant maintenance personnel with your flight record don't get assigned to forgotten outposts. Reynolds met his gaze unflinchingly. I requested the assignment. Why, my reasons are personal, Commander, but I assure you they won't interfere with the mission. Harrison studied her for a long moment. There was more to her story, much more, but right now all that mattered was whether she could do what she claimed. If we do this, you understand the risks, no official authorization, no search and rescue if you go down, and you'll be facing enemy combatants with anti-aircraft capabilities. I understand. Sir, Sullivan called from the terminal. I've compiled the intel. It's not good. Our latest drone footage shows at least 3 heavy machine gun emplacements surrounding Donovan's position, multiple RPG teams, and there are reports that the Taliban in this region have acquired SA-7 manpads. Harrison's jaw tightened. Man-portable air defense systems could bring down an A-10, especially one without full defensive countermeasures. They're also bringing in a ZSU-23-4, Sullivan continued grimly. Soviet-made anti-aircraft system likely captured from the Afghan National Army. Reynolds moved to the screen studying the footage. The ZSU is the primary threat. Its radar can track me, and 423mm cannons can shred even an A-10 if they get a solid lock. Her finger traced a path through the mountain passes. I'll need to come in from the northeast using the terrain for cover. Hug the valley walls to stay below their radar until the last possible moment. The confidence in her assessment was compelling. Harrison found himself nodding. How much time do you need to prep the aircraft? 40 minutes. I'll need help removing the camouflage netting and running final checks. Harrison turned to his team. Masters Rodriguez, you're with Reynolds. Help her with whatever she needs. He checked his watch. We launch in 1 hour. That gives Donovan and his men approximately 2 more hours of ammunition. It'll be close. As the team dispersed, Sullivan lingered. Sir, a word. They moved to a corner of the room out of earshot. You believe her? Sullivan asked quietly. Harrison considered the question. I believe she can fly. Whether she's as good as her reputation suggests remains to be seen. But right now, she's the only option our men have. Sullivan nodded slowly. There's something she's not telling us. About why she's here, why she stopped the flying. He paused. During Operation Phantom Fury in Fallujah 2004, my previous unit was pinned down similar situation to Donovan's. We called for air support expecting nothing. Then this A-10 appears pilot with a woman's voice on the radio. She made 7 gun runs in conditions that should have brought her down 3 times over. Saved every man in my squad. Harrison eyed him. Ghostwriter. Never knew her call sign, but I remember thinking nobody flies like that without something to prove. Sullivan's weathered face turned solemn. Or something to atone for. They both looked through the doorway where Reynolds could be seen gathering equipment, her movements efficient and purposeful. Keep an eye on her, Harrison said. I want to know what she's not telling us. Sullivan nodded. And if Donovan knew her, that can't be coincidence. Agreed, Victon. When we get our men back, we'll get answers. Harrison checked his wound. The bleeding finally slowed. For now, let's focus on making sure they're alive to give them. The hangar stood at the edge of the airfield, its massive doors partially open. As Harrison approached, he could hear the sounds of activity inside metal tools against metal surfaces, the murmur of voices. His arm throbbed, freshly bandaged by the base medic who'd insisted on treating him despite his objections. Inside, the A-10 Thunderbolt II dominated the space. Even beneath dust and faded desert camouflage paint, there was something magnificent about the aircraft. Unlike sleek fighters designed for air superiority, the A-10 was purpose-built for one mission, close air support of ground troops. Its distinctive silhouette, straight wings, twin engines mounted high on the rear fuselage, and the massive 7-barrel GAU-8 Avenger cannon protruding from its nose was unlike any other aircraft in the inventory. Reynolds worked beneath the port wing, her hands moving with practiced certainty across access panels. Masters and Rodriguez assisted, following her quiet, precise instructions. For men accustomed to the brotherhood of special operations, taking direction from an Air Force maintenance sergeant clearly felt unusual, but they adapted with professional efficiency. "Status?" Harrison asked as he approached. Reynolds glanced up. "Engines check out. Weapons systems operational. The targeting computer is partially functional enough for the Mavericks, but gun runs will be manual." "Manual?" Rodriguez questioned. "Like eyeballing it?" "It's how A-10 pilots train before digital systems," Reynolds replied without looking up. "Line up the target, adjust for wind and movement, and trust your instincts." Harrison noted how her hands never hesitated, moving from system to system with the muscle memory of someone who had performed these checks hundreds of times. This wasn't maintenance personnel with basic flight training. This was a combat pilot preparing her aircraft. Sullivan appeared at his side. "I accessed personnel records through the Emergency Tactical Network. It's limited, but I found this." He handed Harrison a tablet displaying a heavily redacted file. Most details were blacked out, but certain elements remained visible. Personnel record: Reynolds Catherine E. rank captain, reverted to staff sergeant, status restricted duty, flight certification revoked pending review. Incident report operation, redacted. June 15, 2007 casualties, redacted. Disciplinary action, redacted. Harrison looked up from the tablet, finding Reynolds watching him. Their eyes met across the hangar, and something unspoken passed between them, the recognition between two warriors who had made difficult decisions under impossible circumstances. Commander Reynolds said, her voice carrying across the space, "May I speak with you privately?" They moved to the hangar's small office. Through the window, Harrison could see Sullivan taking over supervision of the preparations, his experienced eyes checking Reynolds' work. "You've seen my file," Reynolds stated rather than asked. "Part of it. Enough to know you were demoted from captain to staff sergeant. That doesn't happen without serious cause." Reynolds nodded, her expression controlled. "Operation Red Wing 2005. A SEAL reconnaissance team was compromised in Kunar province. I was part of the QRF response." Harrison felt a chill run through him. Every SEAL knew about Operation Red Wings, one of the deadliest days in naval special warfare history. Marcus Luttrell had been the only survivor. "You were there?" he asked quietly. "I was diverted from another mission. Weather was deteriorating, visibility near zero. Command ordered us to turn back." Reynolds' eyes took on a distant quality. "I could hear them on the radio, the SEAL team calling for support as they were overrun." Harrison waited, sensing there was more. "I requested permission to continue the mission despite conditions. Denied. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I considered disregarding the order. In the end, I followed it, turned back while they died." Her voice remained steady, but Harrison could see the cost of that steadiness in the tension around her eyes. 2 years later, a similar situation in Helmand province. Another SEAL team pinned down. "Bad weather denied permission. That time I didn't turn back." "You disobeyed a direct order." "Yes, I saved 14 operators that day." Her gaze was unwavering. "Then I was brought up on charges, demoted and grounded. And you requested assignment here because..." Lieutenant Donovan was on that team in Helmand. He spoke at my hearing, argued that I should be commended, not punished. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "He also said if I ever wanted to make amends for Red Wings, I should find my way to Outpost Condor someday." The pieces clicked into place. "He knew you were here. That's why he requested SEAL Team 6 for this extraction mission." "Likely. Michael believes in backup plans." Her eyes hardened. "Commander, I need to know, will you let me fly this mission?" Despite my record, Harrison considered the woman before him. In many ways, they were opposites. He followed the rules, built his career on being the reliable officer who got results without stepping outside the lines. She had risked everything on a judgment call, choosing lives over orders. Yet looking at her now, Harrison recognized something essential. The same commitment to the operators under their protection that drove his own decisions. Different paths, same destination. When I was an ensign during Desert Storm, he said quietly, an A-10 pilot diverted from his assigned mission to save my unit. No orders, just a pilot who saw Americans in trouble and acted. 18 years later, I'm still alive because of that call. He straightened. I don't care about your record, Staff Sergeant. I care about getting my men home. Can you do that? Yes, sir, I can. Then let's get that bird in the air. They returned to the hangar floor as Sullivan approached. Commander, we've got movement on the perimeter. Thermal imaging shows multiple heat signatures approaching from the south ridge. Harrison's mind raced. How many? At least 20. Could be advanced elements of a larger force. Reynolds moved immediately to the aircraft, calling orders to Masters and Rodriguez. Finish the pre-flight now. We need to be wheels up in 15 minutes. Harrison turned to Sullivan. Alert Captain Lewis. I want all combat effective personnel on the perimeter. And get Wilson working on the emergency transmitter. If we can get even a burst transmission to Bagram, we might get reinforcements. As the preparations accelerated around him, Harrison felt time compressing. Somewhere in the mountains, Donovan and his men were fighting for their lives, ammunition dwindling with each passing minute. On the perimeter, enemy fighters were closing in, seeking to eliminate any chance of rescue. And in the middle stood Reynolds, a grounded pilot with a tarnished record, preparing to fly a combat mission that violated every protocol in the book. Their best hope in their biggest risk. The hangar doors opened fully, revealing the darkened airstrip beyond. The A-10's engines began their distinctive startup sequence, a low whine building to a steady roar. Reynolds climbed the ladder to the cockpit, her movements those of someone returning to a place both familiar and sacred. Harrison approached as she settled into the seat, running through final checks. Staff Sergeant, he began. Sir, she interrupted, looking down at him. For this mission, I need to be Ghost Rider again. Not Staff Sergeant Reynolds. Harrison nodded, understanding. Ghost Rider it is. Bring our boys home. As she strapped in, Harrison noticed a small photograph taped to the instrument panel, men in SEAL combat gear smiling despite the dust and exhaustion etched on their faces. He recognized Donovan among them. The team from Hellman, he asked. Reynolds nodded. My reminder. Of what? That sometimes the right decision isn't in any manual. She lowered the visor on her helmet. Com check. Ghost Rider to Anvil. Do you copy? Harrison moved back, accepting the radio headset Sullivan handed him. Anvil copies. We have enemy movement on the south perimeter. Recommend immediate departure. Copy that, came Reynolds' voice, now tinged with the professional detachment of a pilot entering combat mindset. Ghost Rider rolling in 2 minutes. Send the coordinates for Wolf's team to my tactical display. Sullivan worked the portable communications unit, uploading the data. Sent. Good hunting, Ghost Rider. As Reynolds completed her final checks, an urgent call came through from the perimeter. Commander, we have confirmed Taliban fighters approaching the eastern fence line. Heavy weapons including ARPA, ETA to firing range 3 minutes. Harrison keyed his radio. Ghost Rider, we're out of time. You need to move now. Inside the cockpit, Reynolds made her decision. Roger that, Ghost Rider rolling. The A-10's engines roared to full power, the aircraft beginning to move forward onto the darkened runway. Harrison and Sullivan retreated to the hangar doorway, watching as the Warthog gathered speed. She'll need a miracle to get through those mountains at night, Sullivan muttered. Then it's a good thing we've got a ghost, Harrison replied. The A-10 thundered down the runway, gathering speed until it lifted into the night sky just as the first RPG impacts rocked the perimeter fence. Banking hard to avoid the expected fire, the aircraft quickly disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the fading sound of engines and the uncertain promise of salvation for the men trapped in the valley beyond. As gunfire erupted along the base perimeter, Harrison turned to Sullivan. Get every able body on defense. We need to hold this base until she returns with our men. And if she doesn't return, Harrison watched the night sky where Reynolds had vanished. Then we make sure her sacrifice means something. Now move out, Master Chief. We've got our own fight coming. The battle for Outpost Condor had begun. But the greater test of courage was already winging its way toward the mountains, carried on the determination of a pilot seeking redemption and the prayers of men who had no other hope. The A-10 climbed through the night sky, its silhouette lost against the darkness. Inside the cockpit, Catherine Ghostwriter Reynolds felt the familiar embrace of the seat, the controls responding to her touch, like an extension of her own body. 2 years had passed since she'd flown in combat, but muscle memory took over her hands, moving across switches and gauges with practiced precision. Below Outpost Condor erupted in gunfire as Taliban fighters probed the perimeter. She banked the aircraft sharply away from the engagement, keeping the mountain ridge between herself and potential observers. The less the enemy knew about air support, the more effective her arrival would be. Ghost Rider to Anvil. I'm airborne and proceeding to target area, she reported, voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Harrison's voice crackled through her headset. Copy, Ghost Rider. Be advised we're engaged with enemy forces at the base perimeter. Maintain radio discipline unless absolutely necessary. Understood. Going silent until target approach. Reynolds switched to night vision mode on her helmet display, the world transforming into shades of green. The terrain below was treacherous, steep mountain ridges and narrow valleys perfect for ambushes. She'd flown similar landscapes during her tours, learning the hard way that the mountains of Afghanistan could kill a pilot as easily as enemy fire. The A-10 responded beautifully, its controls slightly stiffer than she remembered, but still reliable. This wasn't the precision-tuned aircraft she'd flown with her squadron. This was a warrior that had seen hard use patched together and kept flying through determination and mechanical ingenuity. Reynolds respected that. As she threaded between mountain peaks, she found herself remembering her first combat mission as an A-10 pilot. Iraq, 2003, during the push toward Baghdad. She'd been nervous, hands slightly trembling on the controls until the moment she'd heard the desperate calls from Marines pinned down by Iraqi armor. Something had shifted in that moment, fear giving way to focused doubt replaced by determination. By the time she completed her third gun run, destroying 4 T-72 tanks, she'd earned the call sign that would follow her through 2 wars. Ghost Rider. The pilot who appeared from nowhere delivered destruction with surgical precision, then vanished back into the sky. Her radio crackled, breaking her reverie. Anvil to Ghost Rider, be advised we have limited communication with Wolf Team. They report heavy contact ammunition at 40% in falling. Enemy closing from 3 directions. Reynolds checked her navigation display. 15 minutes to target area. Copy, Anvil. Please inform Wolf Team that air support is inbound. Authentication code Sierra Tango 97. A pause. Authentication code sent. Wolf acknowledges and reports. Wait 1. Another pause. Wolf reports they have a laser designator with limited battery, can mark primary targets for approximately 3 minutes total. Tell them to conserve it. I'll call when I need the designation. She pushed the throttle forward, accelerating to maximum sustainable speed. The A-10 wasn't built for speed. Its strength was loitering over a battlefield, delivering precision strikes while absorbing punishment that would down most aircraft. But now time was the enemy as much as the Taliban fighters surrounding Donovan's team. The tactical display showed her approaching the outer perimeter of the valley where Wolf Team was trapped. Reynolds reduced altitude, bringing the A-10 down to less than 300 feet above the terrain. Flying this low was dangerous, especially at night, but it would keep her below enemy radar until the last possible moment. Ghost Rider to Wolf, do you copy? She transmitted, switching to the team's frequency. The response came immediately, the voice tight with controlled tension. Wolf copies. Good to hear you, Ghost Rider. Reynolds recognized Donovan's voice instantly. Lieutenant Michael Wolf Donovan, the SEAL officer, who testified at her hearing, arguing passionately that her decision to disobey orders had saved his team. The man who'd somehow engineered her presence at Outpost Condor for exactly this contingency. Sit Rep Wolf, she requested, keeping emotion from her voice. 6 operators, 2 wounded, but ambulatory. Defensive position in abandoned structure at coordinates being transmitted. Enemy force estimated at 60 plus armed, with RPGs, heavy machine guns. They've been probing our position for 3 hours, becoming more aggressive as they realize we have limited ammunition. Reynolds studied the coordinates appearing on her display, correlating them with the terrain features visible through her night vision. Copy that. I'm 2 minutes out. Pop red smoke when you hear my approach. I'll make identification pass before engaging. Understood, Donovan replied. Then more quietly, Kate, good to have you back in the saddle. Reynolds allowed herself a small smile. Save it for when we're all home drinking beer, Wolf. Ghost Rider out. She adjusted her course following the contours of a narrow valley that would bring her to the target area from the northeast, the direction Sullivan's intelligence had indicated would have the least air defense coverage. The A-10's engines growled steadily, the entire airframe vibrating with restrained power. In her mind, Reynolds was already planning her attack sequence, weighing weapons against targets, calculating angles of approach that would minimize her exposure to enemy fire. The valley opened before her, a sprawling battlefield illuminated in the ghostly green of night vision. She could see muzzle flashes erupting from multiple positions, Taliban fighters converging on a small compound where occasional return fire indicated Wolf Team's position. Even from this distance, it was clear the SEALs were outnumbered and surrounded. Wolf, this is Ghost Rider on final approach. Pop smoke now. Moments later, a cloud of red smoke billowed from the compound's courtyard. Reynolds locked the position into her targeting system, then banked the A-10 into a wide turn that would bring her around for her first attack run. I have visual on friendly position, she reported. Beginning engagement. First pass will target heavy weapons emplacement at your northern perimeter. As she lined up her approach, the radio crackled with an incoming transmission from Outpost Condor. Ghost Rider, this is Anvil. Sullivan has reviewed drone footage from earlier today. Be advised, enemy has deployed SA-7 manpads at multiple positions. Approach with extreme caution. Reynolds' jaw tightened. Man-portable air defense systems were a significant threat capable of bringing down even an A-10 if the pilot wasn't vigilant. The older SA-7 models had limited targeting capabilities and were susceptible to countermeasures, but in the hands of experienced operators, they remained deadly. Copy Anvil, adjusting tactics. She reduced altitude further, bringing the A-10 dangerously close to the ridgelines. Flying this low eliminated the SA-7's advantage of altitude, forcing operators to acquire a difficult target moving at high speed through complex terrain. It also increased her own risk of collision with the landscape, especially at night. The risk calculation was simple: better to trust her flying skills than leave those men below to die. The targeting reticle in her high HUD aligned with the northern heavy weapons position, a sandbagged emplacement where a DSHK 12.7mm machine gun poured fire toward the SEAL position. Reynolds placed her thumb over the weapons release, took a breath, and spoke calmly into her radio. Wolf Team, keep your heads down. Guns hot. She squeezed the trigger. The A-10 shuddered as the GAU-8 Avenger cannon unleashed its distinctive roar, a sound like nothing else in warfare, often described as a giant buzzsaw tearing through the sky. 30mm depleted uranium rounds streaked toward the target at nearly 400 feet per second, the 7-barrel rotary cannon spitting out almost 70 rounds each second. The heavy weapons position disappeared in a maelstrom of dust and fire. Secondary explosions indicated ammunition cooking off as Reynolds pulled up sharply, banking into a tight turn that would bring her around for a second attack run. Northern gun position neutralized, she reported. Wolf, direct me to next priority target. Ghost Rider, we have a technical vehicle with mounted ZPU approaching from the east. Troops in the open following behind. Reynolds spotted it immediately, a Toyota pickup truck with a Soviet-era 14.5mm anti-aircraft gun mounted in the bed. The weapon was primitive compared to modern air defense systems, but still entirely capable of shredding an aircraft at close range. I see it, making gun run now, followed by Maverick on the convoy behind. She lined up her second approach, coming in from a different angle to avoid presenting a predictable target. This time, she felt the aircraft shudder with impacts as small arms fire found its mark. The A-10 absorbed the punishment, its redundant systems and armored cockpit designed specifically for this environment. The GAU-8 spoke again, its distinctive brr-RT echoing across the valley. The technical vehicle erupted in flames, its ammunition cooking off in a spectacular secondary explosion that engulfed several nearby fighters. Without pausing, Reynolds acquired the following convoy with her targeting system. The AGM-65 Maverick missile dropped from the A-10's hardpoint, its engine igniting as it streaked toward the cluster of vehicles. The explosion illuminated the entire eastern approach, vehicles and fighters disappearing in the expanding fireball. Eastern approach clear, Reynolds reported, banking hard to avoid a sudden tracer stream from a previously undetected position. Be advised, I'm taking fire from the western ridge. That's their command position. Donovan's voice came through, urgency evident. They have the ZSU-23 up there. I can see it moving into position. Reynolds' heart rate spiked. The ZSU-23-4 Shilka was a serious threat in a radar-guided anti-aircraft system featuring four 23mm autocannons capable of tracking and engaging aircraft with devastating effectiveness. If it acquired a targeting lock, even the A-10's legendary durability would be tested. Wolf, I need that laser designation on the ZSU. Now. Roger. Designating now. A small indicator lit up on Reynolds' HUD as the SEAL team's laser designator painted the target. She aligned her second Maverick missile, waiting for the confirmation tone that indicated a solid lock. I have tone. Missile away. The Maverick dropped free its guidance system following the laser designation to the target. Reynolds didn't wait to confirm the hit, immediately throwing the A-10 into a series of evasive maneuvers as the ZSU's radar likely had acquired her position. The explosion on the western ridge confirmed the hit, but her tactical display showed the missile had only partially destroyed the target. The ZSU's radar was disabled, but at least two of its cannons remained operational, now firing blindly into the sky in her general direction. Partial effect on target, she reported. ZSU radar destroyed, but guns still active, making another pass to finish it. Before Donovan could respond, Reynolds' threat warning system blared. Missile launch, missile launch. Training took over instantly. She deployed countermeasures, dropping flares and chaff while simultaneously pushing the A-10 into a steep dive toward the valley floor. The SA-7 heat-seeking missile followed, drawn initially to her engine exhaust before being confused by the flares. The missile detonated several hundred feet behind her, close enough that the shockwave rocked the aircraft but far enough to prevent serious damage. Reynolds pulled out of the dive with less than 200 feet to spare the terrain, proximity warnings screaming in her ears. Ghost Rider status, Harrison's voice cut through concern, evident despite the static. Still flying, she responded tersely, taking more fire than expected. These aren't typical Taliban fighters. Intelligence suggests possible foreign advisors, Harrison replied, former military professionals providing training and tactical leadership. That explained the coordinated air defense and disciplined ground tactics. Reynolds quickly reassessed her approach. Standard attack runs wouldn't work against an enemy this sophisticated. She needed to be unpredictable. Wolf, what's your ammunition status? Critical, Donovan replied. Maybe 15 minutes of defensive fire remaining. They're massing for another push from the south. Reynolds checked her weapons display. 2 MiG-82, 500-pound bombs, 6 rockets, and approximately 700 rounds remaining for the GAU-8. Enough for several more attack runs if she used them wisely. Hold position, she instructed. I'm going to clear your extraction route to the north, then provide cover for your movement. Copy that. We'll be ready on your mark. Reynolds banked the A-10 toward the damaged but still operational ZSU-23. Without its radar guidance, the weapon was less lethal but still dangerous. She approached from below the ridgeline, using the terrain to mask her approach until the last possible moment. When she crested the ridge, the ZSU's operators were caught by surprise, unable to traverse their weapons quickly enough to track her. The GAU-8 made short work of the threat, the depleted uranium rounds tearing through the lightly armored vehicle and igniting its ammunition storage. The resulting explosion sent a fireball high into the night sky. ZSU neutralized, Reynolds reported, already banking toward her next target, beginning clearance of northern extraction route. For the next several minutes, Reynolds methodically attacked enemy positions along the route Wolf team would need to follow to reach safety. Each pass brought intense ground fire, the A-10 absorbing hits that would have downed most aircraft. Warning indicators lit up her console as systems began to take damage, but the redundant design kept her airborne. After her 6th attack run, Reynolds' fuel warning illuminated. Between the high-speed approach and combat maneuvering, she was burning through her reserves faster than planned. Wolf, this is Ghost Rider. Time to move. Northern route is as clear as it's going to get. I'll provide overhead cover until you reach the extraction point. Copy that. Wolf team moving now. Through her night vision, Reynolds could see the 6 operators emerging from their defensive position, moving in a tactical formation with wounded personnel in the center. Immediately, enemy fire converged on their position from multiple directions. Reynolds didn't hesitate. She brought the A-10 in low and fast cannon, blazing at the closest threat, a group of fighters attempting to cut off the SEAL's escape route. The GAU-8 scattered them, buying precious seconds for Donovan's team to advance. Keep moving, she urged. I've got you covered. For the next 10 minutes, Reynolds executed a deadly dance above the wind, alternating between attacking enemy positions and deploying countermeasures against continued missile launches. The A-10 shuddered with each new impact systems failing one by one as the cumulative damage took its toll. Hydraulic pressure warnings flashed red. The port engine began to lose power. Fuel continued to drop at an alarming rate. But below, Wolf Team made steady progress toward the extraction point, a small plateau 2 kilometers from their original position where a helicopter could potentially land. Ghost Rider were taking heavy fire from the East Ridge, Donovan reported urgently. RPG teams repositioning to cut us off. Reynolds banked toward the threat, lining up another gun run. When she pressed the trigger, however, the GAU-8 fired only a brief burst before falling silent. The ammunition counter read 0. Out of cannon ammo, she reported, quickly assessing her remaining options, switching to rockets. She selected the remaining rockets targeting the RPG positions along the eastern ridge. The weapon streaked away, impacting with satisfying explosions that temporarily suppressed the enemy fire. Wolf Team used the opportunity to advance another 100 meters toward their objective. 500 meters to extraction point, Donovan reported. Enemy closing from multiple directions. Reynolds checked her fuel gauge, performing rapid mental calculations. She had enough for perhaps 2 more attack runs before being forced to return to base, assuming the damaged aircraft could make the journey. That's when she spotted it, a convoy of 3 vehicles racing along a valley approach, clearly aiming to reach the extraction point before Wolf Team. Through her targeting camera, she could see fighters armed with heavy weapons, including what appeared to be another anti-aircraft gun being transported. Wolf be advised, enemy reinforcements approaching from the southwest. 3 vehicles, heavy weapons. We see them, Donovan replied grimly. No way we reach the extraction point before they cut us off. Reynolds made her decision instantly. I'll handle the convoy, continue to extraction point. She aligned her approach, preparing to deploy her final 2 Mk-82 bombs. As she did, a warning tone shrieked through her helmet missile lock. She caught the flash of another SA-7 launch from a position she'd thought cleared. Training and instinct took over. Reynolds deployed her remaining countermeasures and executed a violent, evasive maneuver. The missile streaked past, missing her aircraft by mere feet, close enough that the proximity detonation damaged her starboard stabilizer. The A-10 lurched sickeningly, nearly entering an uncontrolled roll before Reynolds fought it back level through sheer force of will. Damage indicators cascaded across her console. The aircraft was failing around her, but she still had control, barely, and she still had her bombs. Ghost Rider, we heard that explosion. Status, Donovan's voice carried barely contained concern. Still here, Reynolds replied, wrestling the wounded aircraft into position. But not for long. Get your men to cover. This is going to be close. She lined up her final approach on the enemy convoy, ignoring the master caution alarms now filling her cockpit. The targeting system was damaged, forcing her to rely on visual acquisition alone. The way A-10 pilots had done it before computers, she thought grimly. Back to basics. Bombs away. The 2 Mk-82s released simultaneously, falling toward the tightly grouped vehicles below. Reynolds immediately pulled up and away, pushing the damaged engines to their limits as she cleared the blast radius. The valley floor erupted in twin fireballs as the bombs found their targets. The convoy disappeared in the conflagration's secondary explosions, indicating weapon stores detonating in chain reactions. Convoy neutralized, Reynolds reported, checking her systems. Fuel was critically low, hydraulic pressure failing, and the starboard engine temperature climbing dangerously. Wolf Team, what's your status? We're at the extraction point, Donovan replied, his voice tight with controlled urgency. But we've got enemy fighters converging from multiple directions. Without air cover, we won't hold this position long enough for extraction. Reynolds scanned her tactical display. The extraction point was a small clearing, surrounded by higher terrain, perfect for a helicopter landing, but also perfect for an ambush. Enemy fighters were indeed approaching from at least 3 directions, using terrain features for cover. She had no cannon ammunition, no missiles, no bombs, and barely enough fuel to return to base. The A-10 was essentially flying scrap metal, at this point systems failing faster than she could compensate for them, but she still had one weapon left, the A-10 itself. Wolf, I'm going to make a low pass over your position. When I do, I want you to fall back to the southern edge of the clearing. Make it obvious, let them see you moving. What are you planning, Ghost Rider? Donovan asked, a note of suspicion in his voice. Just trust me, Reynolds replied, and get ready to pop green smoke when I tell you. She banked the aircraft into a wide turn, lining up an approach that would take her directly over Wolf Team's position. As she did, Reynolds reduced altitude to less than 100 feet, a dangerously low level that would leave no room for error. "Beginning approach," she reported. "Fall back now, Wolf." Through her night vision, she could see the SEAL team executing a tactical withdrawal to the southern edge of the clearing. As predicted, enemy fighters began to advance, sensing an opportunity to overwhelm the seemingly retreating Americans. Reynolds pushed the throttle forward, ignoring the engine temperature warnings now flashing critical alerts. The A-10 accelerated, bearing down on the clearing like an avenging angel. Now Wolf Green, smoke southern edge. As the smoke billowed upward, Reynolds made a split-second calculation, then executed one of the most dangerous maneuvers in any pilot's arsenal. She cut power to both engines and deployed full air brakes, essentially turning the A-10 into a 30,000-pound gliding weapon. The aircraft dropped precipitously, its massive silhouette suddenly visible to enemy fighters who had advanced into the clearing. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. Fighters scattered in panic, breaking cover and exposing themselves to the SEALs' precision fire. "Taking targets of opportunity," Donovan reported, his voice betraying a hint of admiration as he realized Reynolds' strategy. Reynolds fought to maintain control of the gliding aircraft, using minimal power pulses to adjust her course. She passed over the clearing at less than 50 feet, the downdraft from her wings kicking up dust and debris. The enemy forces, already disorganized by her unexpected maneuver, broke, completely retreating in multiple directions. "That bought us maybe 5 minutes, Donovan estimated. "Not enough for Anvil to all units," Harrison's voice cut in. "We have a QRF helicopter inbound to extraction point. ETA 3 minutes. Sergeant Wilson got a burst transmission through to Bagram, Aram." Reynolds allowed herself a moment of relief. Quick reaction force meant extraction was imminent. Her mission was nearly complete. "Copy, Anvil," she acknowledged. "I'll maintain presence until QRF arrives." "Ghost Rider, what's your fuel status?" Harrison asked, concern evident. Reynolds glanced at her gauge. "Minimal, enough for one more circuit, then I need to return to base." She chose not to mention the multiple system failures that made a safe return increasingly unlikely. "Understood. QRF reports 2 CH-47 Chinooks inbound with Apache escort." Reynolds began a slow circle around the extraction point, the damaged A-10 struggling to maintain altitude. She watched enemy fighters regrouping at the perimeter, hesitant to advance while she remained overhead, but clearly planning another assault. "Wolf, be advised, enemy massing at northern tree line. Approximately 20 fighters, small arms, and armed." "Copy," Donovan replied. "We're in defensive positions, conserving ammunition." The minutes stretched endlessly as Reynolds continued her circuit, the A-10 systems deteriorating further with each passing second. Her fuel gauge now showed emergency reserves, only barely enough to reach Outpost Condor if she left immediately. Then she heard it, the distinctive whop, whop, whop of helicopter rotors approaching from the south. The QRF had arrived. "Ghost Rider, this is Vengeance 6-1, came a new voice over the tactical frequency. 2 Chinooks with Apache escort approaching your position." "Copy, Vengeance," Reynolds responded. "Wolf team is at the green smoke. Enemy forces surrounding the clearing, heaviest concentration to the north." "Understood. Apaches engaging northern positions now." Reynolds watched as missile fire erupted from the approaching gunships, striking the enemy positions she'd identified. The Chinooks followed close behind, their massive forms descending toward the clearing where Wolf team waited. "Ghost Rider, you are cleared to RTB," Harrison's voice came through. "QRF has the situation in hand." Reynolds hesitated, watching as the first Chinook touched down amid swirling dust. Wolf team began moving toward it, maintaining defensive fire as they went. The second Chinook hovered nearby, its door gunners providing additional suppression. "Ghost Rider, did you copy?" Harrison pressed. "Return to base immediately. Your fuel status is critical." "Copy, Anvil," she finally acknowledged. "RTB now." Reynolds banked the A-10 away from the extraction zone, setting course for Outpost Condor. As she did, a single voice broke through on a private channel. "Kate," Donovan's voice slightly breathless as he and his team boarded the helicopter. "You did it, just like Helmand, above and beyond." Reynolds smiled faintly. "Just evening the score, Wolf. Get home safe." "You too," he replied, "though from the sound of your engines, that's not a given." Reynolds glanced at her instrument panel where warning lights now outnumbered functioning indicators. I've flown worse. No, you haven't, Donovan said with a short laugh. But if anyone can land that flying wreck, it's you. See you at base, Ghost Rider. The channel closed as the Chinooks lifted off, carrying Wolf Team to safety. Mission accomplished. Now she just had to get herself home. The return journey quickly became a battle between pilot and failing aircraft. The starboard engine finally gave out 20 miles from Outpost Condor, forcing Reynolds to compensate with the remaining engine. Hydraulic systems failed next, leaving her with minimal control surfaces and requiring constant adjustments to maintain level flight. Ghost Rider to Anvil. She transmitted voice calm despite the crisis. Be advised I am experiencing multiple system failures. Requesting priority landing and crash response teams standing by. Copy, Ghost Rider, Harrison replied immediately. Runway is clear. Emergency teams are in position. What's your ETA? Reynolds checked her navigation display, which flickered ominously. Approximately 7 minutes. Be advised I may need to attempt a no-flap, single-engine landing. Understood. We'll be ready. The outpost appeared on the horizon, its lights a welcome beacon in the darkness. Reynolds began her approach, calculating angles and speed with the precision of a pilot who understood that mathematics was the difference between life and death. With failing hydraulics, she would have one chance at landing, no go-arounds, no corrections. Final approach, she reported, lining up with the runway. Be advised, aircraft is increasingly unstable. She focused entirely on the rapidly approaching airstrip, ignoring the cacophony of alarms in the cockpit. The A-10 bucked beneath her, the controls growing heavier as more systems failed. Reynolds compensated instinctively, drawing on thousands of hours of flight experience to coax the dying aircraft towards safety. The runway threshold passed beneath her, the damaged landing gear extending through manual override. Reynolds cut power to the remaining engine, letting the A-10 settle onto the concrete with a jarring impact. The right landing gear collapsed immediately, sending the aircraft skidding sideways in a shower of sparks. Reynolds fought the controls, keeping the A-10's nose straight enough to prevent a catastrophic roll. The aircraft slid down the runway, gradually slowing as friction bled away its momentum. When it finally stopped, tilted at an awkward angle with smoke pouring from the engines, Reynolds sat motionless for a moment, allowing her racing heart to slow. Then, with practiced motions, she shut down all remaining systems and released her harness. Emergency vehicles converged on the aircraft, lights flashing. Reynolds pushed open the canopy manually and climbed out onto the wing, dropping to the tarmac as fire suppression teams approached. Harrison was there, Sullivan beside him, both men looking at her with expressions that combined relief and disbelief. Well, Sullivan said dryly, guess you can still fly after all. Reynolds managed a tired smile. Aircraft needs a little work before the next mission. Harrison shook his head, gesturing at the smoking wreckage. I count at least 30 bullet holes, a missing chunk of wing, and what looks like missile fragment damage to the fuselage. That bird is never flying again. Neither was Wolf Team if we hadn't tried, Reynolds countered. Harrison's expression sobered. You're right about that. QRF reports all 6 operators extracted successfully en route to Bagram now. He extended his hand. You did the impossible tonight, Reynolds. She accepted the handshake, suddenly aware of the exhaustion seeping into her bones. 2 years away from the cockpit, and she just pushed herself through one of the most demanding combat flights imaginable. Not impossible, she corrected quietly. Just what needed to be done. Sullivan studied her with newfound respect. You know, I was at Fallujah in 2004. My unit was pinned down situation foobar when this A-10 comes screaming in. Pilot with the woman's voice on the radio call sign we couldn't quite catch. Made 7 gun runs when anyone else would have broken off after 3. Reynolds met his gaze steadily. I remember. You had a guy with a bright red bandana. Against regulation, but made for a good visual reference. Sullivan's eyes widened. That was you. That was me, Reynolds confirmed. Harrison looked between them, then gestured toward the command center. The base is secure for now. Enemy forces withdrew when they saw the QRF helicopters. We should debrief while everything's fresh. Reynolds nodded, falling into step beside them. As they walked away from the damaged A-10, she glanced back once at the aircraft that had carried her through yet another impossible mission. Despite its wounds, it had brought her home. Just like always. Inside the command center, the atmosphere had transformed. Where tension and doubt had reigned hours earlier, now there was the controlled energy of successful operations. Operators moved with purpose, communications specialists maintained contact with the QRF, and the tactical display showed the extraction proceeding smoothly. Captain Lewis approached as they entered, his expression a complex mixture of relief and professional concern. Commander Harrison, Staff Sergeant Reynolds, I've been in contact with Central Command. Communications have been restored. Convenient timing, Sullivan muttered. Lewis flushed slightly. The sabotage has been identified and addressed. A component in the primary SATCOM array was deliberately damaged. We're investigating how it happened. Harrison nodded, and I assume Central Command is asking questions about an unauthorized A-10 sortie from a supposedly non-flying base. They are, Lewis admitted. I've been instructed to compile a full report on tonight's events. I'll save you the trouble, Captain Reynolds said quietly. I acted alone, took the aircraft without authorization. Commander Harrison and his team had no part in the decision. Harrison turned to her sharply. That's not how it happened, and that's not what the report will say. Bussertime, Reynolds began, with respect. No, Harrison cut her off. I authorized the mission under Con-Plan 8044. I take full responsibility for that decision and its outcomes, which I might add include the successful extraction of 6 operators who would otherwise be dead or captured. Lewis looked uncomfortable. Commander, you understand the protocols that were violated. I understand that protocols exist to serve the mission, Captain, not the other way around. Harrison interrupted firmly. My after-action report will detail the enemy's sabotage of our communications, the imminent threat to American lives, and the extraordinary measures required to resolve the situation. It will also include my highest recommendation for Staff Sergeant Reynolds, whose actions tonight exemplify the finest traditions of the United States Air Force. Lewis looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in Harrison's expression dissuaded him. Very well, Commander. I'll await your report. He nodded stiffly and withdrew. Sullivan chuckled once the captain was out of earshot. He'll still write his own report. Let him, Harrison replied. The facts speak for themselves. Reynolds sank into a chair, fatigue finally catching up to her. This isn't over. There will be questions, investigations, the same bureaucracy that grounded me 2 years ago. Harrison studied her thoughtfully. Why did you request assignment here, Reynolds? The truth this time. She was quiet for a moment, weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she met his gaze directly. Donovan contacted me 3 months ago, said he'd been tracking a Taliban commander with unusual tactics, sophisticated equipment, someone who'd studied American extraction protocols and developed countermeasures. The commander who ambushed my team today, Harrison surmised. Reynolds nodded. Donovan believed this commander was receiving assistance from a third party, possibly former military advisors from another nation-state. He wanted someone nearby with close air support experience, just in case. So you buried yourself in maintenance duties, waiting for a call that might never come, Sullivan said. Waiting to make amends, Reynolds corrected softly. For the times I followed orders when I should have followed my conscience. Harrison exchanged a glance with Sullivan. Operation Red Wings. Reynolds' expression tightened. I heard them on the radio, begging for air support while command told us to turn back because of weather conditions. I obeyed that order, and good men died. She looked down at her hands. I swore it would never happen again. A silence fell over the room, heavy with understanding. Every operator knew the weight of decisions made in combat, the lives balanced against regulations, the second-guessing that came afterward. The thing about amends, Sullivan finally had said, is knowing when you've made them. He nodded toward the tactical display where the QRF helicopters were shown safely departing the area. I'd say tonight counts. Before Reynolds could respond, the door opened and a communications specialist entered. Commander, urgent message from Bagram. The QRF encountered heavy fire during extraction. Lieutenant Donovan was wounded. Harrison straightened. How bad? GSW to the leg and shoulder. He's stable, but being prepped for surgery on arrival. Reynolds felt a cold knot form in her stomach. After everything, after the impossible mission and miraculous extraction, Wolf still hadn't escaped unscathed. There's more, sir, the specialist continued. They recovered intelligence from the Taliban commander's position. Preliminary analysis indicates possible connections to Pakistani ISI elements. Harrison's expression darkened. That would explain the level of tactical sophistication and why they targeted a team extracting a State Department analyst. This wasn't just an ambush, Reynolds realized. It was a deliberate operation to capture American personnel with a potential intelligence value. And to test our response protocols, Sullivan added grimly. See how we react when communications are compromised and teams are isolated. Harrison turned to Reynolds. The sabotage here, the ambush, the sophisticated air defenses, this was all coordinated. Someone wanted to ensure that when Wolf Team called for help, no one would answer. They didn't count on Ghost Rider, Sullivan said with a hint of pride. Reynolds shook her head slowly. No, they didn't count on you, Commander. Anyone else would have followed protocol, waited for proper authorization, and those men would be dead or worse. She held his gaze. You made the call that mattered. Harrison seemed about to respond when another specialist entered, his expression urgent. Sir, Central Command is on Secure Line 1. General Mitchell wants to speak with you and Staff Sergeant Reynolds immediately. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Reynolds stood squaring her shoulders despite her exhaustion. Whatever consequences awaited, she would face them without regret. Tonight she had returned to the sky to her true purpose. She had balanced the scales for Red Wings, and 6 men were coming home because of it. After you, Commander, she said quietly. Harrison nodded, his expression resolute. Together, Staff Sergeant. We made this decision, together, we faced the music together. As they walked toward the secure communications room, Sullivan called after them. For what it's worth, I'll take Ghost Rider over regulations any day. Reynolds smiled faintly. The night had brought her full circle from the grounded pilot hiding in maintenance duties to the combat aviator she'd always been. Whatever came next, that truth couldn't be taken away again. The door to the communications room closed behind them, but the legend of Ghost Rider's return had only begun to spread. The secure communications room felt smaller than it was, its walls lined with encryption equipment and classified communications protocols. A single monitor dominated the center of the room, the satellite connection indicator glowing steady green, a stark contrast to the communications blackout hours earlier. Reynolds stood at parade rest beside Harrison, both of them facing the screen where General Mitchell's stern visage filled the display. The 3-star general commanded all special operations in the region, his reputation for by-the-book leadership well established throughout the ranks. Let me make sure I understand the sequence of events, Commander Harrison, Mitchell said, his voice clipped with controlled anger. Your team was ambushed during a high-priority extraction. Communications were sabotaged, and instead of following protocol to restore proper channels, you authorized an Air Force maintenance sergeant to fly a non-mission ready A-10 into combat without clearance or authorization. That is correct, sir, Harrison replied without hesitation. Mitchell's gaze shifted to Reynolds. And you, Staff Sergeant, despite having your flight status revoked 2 years ago, chose to pilot this aircraft into a combat zone with unknown air defenses, risking not only your life, but potentially compromising an already dangerous situation. Reynolds met his gaze steadily. Yes, sir. The general's expression hardened. Do either of you have any concept of the diplomatic nightmare you've potentially created? We have confirmed intelligence that Pakistani ISI elements were involved in this operation. An unauthorized airstrike could be construed as an escalation outside approved engagement parameters. With respect, sir, Harrison interjected. The alternative was the capture or death of 6 SEAL operators and potential compromise of classified intelligence regarding State Department operations. Mitchell fell silent for a moment, studying them both. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted subtly. The president has been briefed on the situation. He's particularly interested in how a grounded pilot managed to single-handedly clear an extraction zone while flying what the maintenance report describes as, and I quote, an aircraft that should not have remained airborne under any circumstances. Reynolds blinked, surprised by the unexpected direction. Staff Sergeant Reynolds, Mitchell continued, your flight recorder data has been analyzed at Bagram. The tactics you employed against superior numbers and advanced air defenses are being described by our analysts as textbook examples of close air support under impossible conditions. Sir, Reynolds began, but Mitchell cut her off. I didn't say you could speak yet, Sergeant. The general leaned forward. 2 years ago, you disobeyed a direct order to abort a mission due to weather conditions. You risked your aircraft, your life, and violated the chain of command. The fact that you saved 14 operators was the only reason you weren't discharged entirely. Yes, sir, Reynolds acknowledged quietly. Tonight, Mitchell continued, you did it again. Flew without authorization in an aircraft that wasn't cleared for combat operations against an enemy with sophisticated air defenses. His expression remained stern, but something else flickered in his eyes. And once again, American operators are alive because of it. The general sat back, glancing at something off-screen, before returning his attention to them. Commander Harrison, your after-action report is being expedited through channels. The intelligence regarding foreign involvement in tonight's ambush has raised this incident to the highest levels of national security. Questions will be asked. Investigations will follow. I understand, sir, Harrison replied. I take full responsibility for all decisions made under my command. As you should, Mitchell affirmed. However, initial assessment suggests your invocation of Con Plan 8044 was justified under the circumstances. The communications sabotage alone would have triggered contingency protocols. The general's focus shifted back to Reynolds. As for you, Staff Sergeant, or should I say Captain Reynolds? Reynolds stiffened. Sir, your reinstatement to rank and flight status is being processed as we speak. Effective immediately, you are transferred to Special Operations Air Component as a CAS advisor and A-10 pilot. Mitchell's expression remained stern, but a hint of approval crept into his tone. It seems the Pentagon has decided that talents like yours are wasted in maintenance duties. Reynolds stood motionless, struggling to process the general's words. Reinstatement. Captain. Flying again. I don't understand, sir, she finally managed. The review board was clear about the terms of my grounding. The review board didn't have tonight's flight data, Mitchell replied, or the testimonials from 6 SEAL operators who owe you their lives, or the rather forceful recommendation from certain high-ranking officers who believe your judgment in combat might occasionally be better than that of commanders safely behind the lines. Harrison remained silent beside her, but Reynolds could sense his satisfaction. There will still be consequences, Mitchell warned. You both broke enough regulations to fill a court-martial docket, but given the circumstances and outcomes, those consequences will take a different form. He reached for something off-screen. Captain Reynolds, you are hereby assigned as Special Operations Air Liaison Officer for SEAL Team 6, effective immediately. Commander Harrison will be your direct superior officer for all operational matters. Reynolds felt her world tilting on its axis, not only reinstated but assigned directly to support the very team she'd just rescued. It was unprecedented. Sir, I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say yes, sir, and get ready to deploy again with his 72 hours, Mitchell instructed. The intelligence recovered tonight suggests this was part of a larger operation. We need to know who's providing advanced training and equipment to these Taliban units, and why they specifically targeted a team extracting a State Department analyst. Harrison stepped forward slightly. General Lieutenant Donovan was wounded during the extraction. He may have insights that could assist the investigation. Donovan is already being debriefed at Bagram, Mitchell confirmed. Once he's stabilized, he'll be your first stop commander. I want your team to follow this trail wherever it leads. Yes, sir, Harrison acknowledged. Mitchell's expression softened marginally. One more thing. The President has authorized me to inform you both that your actions tonight, while procedurally questionable, exemplify the highest traditions of service and sacrifice. Formal recognition will follow the completion of all investigations, but you should know that your chain of command stands behind you. The screen went blank before either of them could respond, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Well, Harrison said after a moment, that was not the conversation I was expecting. Reynolds stared at the now dark monitor, still processing the abrupt reversal of her professional fortunes. Sir, did that really just happen? It did. Harrison turned to her, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Congratulations, Captain Reynolds. It seems Ghost Rider is officially back from the dead. The reality began to sink in, bringing with it a complex mixture of emotions, relief, vindication, but also an undercurrent of apprehension. They're putting me back in the cockpit, after everything that happened. They're putting you exactly where you belong, Harrison corrected, where you've always belonged. Reynolds met his gaze, finding unexpected understanding there. Why did you back me up, Commander? You barely know me. You risked your career on a decision that could have ended in disaster. Harrison considered the question seriously. 20 years in special operations teaches you to recognize certain qualities. The willingness to put mission and team above self. The ability to make impossible decisions under pressure. He paused. When you stood up in that command room and said, "I can fly," I saw something I recognized. The same quality I've seen in every operator who's ever risked everything to bring their teammates home. The door opened before Reynolds could respond, Sullivan entering with a tablet in hand. "Just got word from Bagram. Donovan's out of surgery, condition stable. He's asking to speak with you both." Harrison nodded. "Arrange secure video conference in 30 minutes. And Master Chief, you might want to address the captain properly." Sullivan's eyes widened slightly as he looked at Reynolds. "Captain, well, I'll be damned." He grinned. "Guess I should start being nicer to you, ma'am." Reynolds felt a smile tugging at her own lips. "That would be a refreshing change, Master Chief." Sullivan's expression grew more serious. "Intel team has completed preliminary analysis of materials recovered from the Taliban commander's position. Something you both need to see." He led them back to the command center where the tactical display had been reconfigured to show photographic evidence and intelligence reports. Images of recovered equipment, documents, translated communications filled the screens. "This isn't standard Taliban," Sullivan explained, highlighting several items. "These are advanced communication jammers, Russian-made but modified with Chinese components. The encryption protocols match those used by Pakistani intelligence services, but the tactical deployment suggests training by someone with Western military experience." Harrison studied the display with narrowed eyes. "Someone's using Taliban forces as proxies for a more sophisticated operation." "That's our assessment," Sullivan agreed. "And it gets worse. The team found this in the commander's possession." He brought up an image of a partially burned document, its contents still legible enough to send a chill through Reynolds. It was an operational brief on A-10 close air support protocols, including typical response times approach, vectors, and most disturbing, common pilot communication phrases and authentication codes. "They knew exactly what to expect if air support was called," Reynolds said quietly, "and exactly how to counter it." "This wasn't just about capturing SEAL operators," Harrison concluded. "It was a field test of countermeasures against our tactical air support. They wanted to see if their anti-aircraft measures and communications sabotage would work against our standard protocols." "Which it would have," Sullivan pointed out, "if we'd followed standard protocols." Harrison turned to Reynolds. "They weren't expecting Ghost Rider. They weren't expecting a pilot who could fly without targeting computers, who knew how to defeat air defenses through terrain masking and unconventional approaches." "Old school tactics," Reynolds nodded. "Before everything became dependent on digital systems and satellite guidance." "Exactly," Sullivan agreed. "Your flying tonight didn't just save Wolf Team. It exposed a vulnerability in someone's careful planning. And that someone is going to want to know what went wrong." The implications settled heavily over the room. What had seemed like a desperate mission to save stranded operators now appeared to be part of something larger, a chess piece in a game whose board extended far beyond the mountains of Afghanistan. "The State Department analyst," Reynolds said suddenly. "What was his area of expertise?" Harrison checked the mission brief on his tablet. "Dr. James Whitaker, specialist in tracking financial networks supporting terrorism. He was investigating funding sources for recent Taliban weapons acquisitions." The pieces began to align in Reynolds' mind. Someone didn't want him completing that investigation. Someone with access to Pakistani intelligence resources, Russian equipment, and knowledge of our tactical protocols. "A very dangerous someone," Sullivan concluded grimly. Before they could pursue this line of thinking further, a communications specialist approached. "Captain Reynolds, Commander Harrison, secure video link with Lieutenant Donovan is ready." They moved to the adjacent room where a secure terminal had been prepared. The screen flickered to life, revealing Donovan propped up in a hospital bed. Despite the bandages visible on his shoulder and the pallor of blood loss, his expression brightened at the sight of them. "Commander," he greeted Harrison. Then his gaze shifted. "And Captain Reynolds, I see. About damn time they gave you your bars back." Reynolds smiled. "Word travels fast." "Good news always does." Donovan adjusted his position, slightly wincing. "I understand I have you both to thank for the fact that I'm lying in a hospital bed instead of a Taliban prison." "Just doing our jobs, Lieutenant," Harrison replied. "Though I'm curious why you neglected to mention during mission planning that you had a grounded A-10 pilot stashed at our forward operating base. Donovan had the good grace to look slightly abashed. Contingency planning, sir. After what happened in Helmand, I knew Kate, Captain Reynolds, would be the kind of ace you'd want up your sleeve if things went sideways. That's quite an omission, Lieutenant, Harrison said, his tone stern, though not truly angry. Permission to speak freely, sir, Donovan asked. Harrison nodded. After Red Wings after Helmand, I watched the bureaucracy ground one of the finest CAS pilots in the Air Force because she prioritized operator lives over weather regulations. I wasn't about to let the same bureaucracy prevent her from being in position if we needed her again. Donovan's gaze shifted to Reynolds. I knew you'd stand up when it mattered, Kate. You always do. Reynolds felt a complicated mix of emotions, gratitude for his faith in her frustration at being manipulated, even as she understood his motivations. You could have told me what you were planning. Would you have agreed to it? Donovan asked simply. She considered the question honestly. Probably not. Exactly. Sometimes the best plans are the ones people don't know they're part of until the moment arrives. His expression grew more serious. What matters is that when Commander Harrison asked if anyone could fly, you stood up, just like I knew you would. Harrison interrupted the exchange. Lieutenant, we need to discuss the intelligence implications of what happened tonight. The equipment recovered, the tactics employed. This wasn't a standard Taliban operation. Donovan's expression shifted instantly to professional focus. No, sir, it wasn't. Whitaker had uncovered evidence of a shadow financing network moving millions through shell companies in Dubai, Islamabad, and Moscow. He believed he had identified a single coordinator, someone with military background, using private military contractors to train Taliban forces in advanced anti-American tactics. Did he have a name for this coordinator? Sullivan asked. Only a code name, Architect. Donovan shifted again, discomfort visible on his face. Sir, the ambush tonight wasn't random. The entire operation, the communications sabotage, the anti-aircraft emplacements, it was all designed specifically to counter our extraction protocols. Someone knew exactly when and how we'd come for Whitaker and exactly how to ensure no help would arrive. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. They had a leak somewhere in their chain of command. Get some rest, Lieutenant, Harrison finally said. We'll continue this conversation when you're back with the team. He paused, which I expect to be sooner rather than later, knowing your typical disregard for medical advice. Donovan smiled faintly. They say 2 weeks. I'll make it 1. Make it 2, Reynolds interjected firmly. We need you at full strength. As the connection ended, Harrison turned to Sullivan and Reynolds. I want everything we have on this Architect. Financial trails, operational patterns, suspected locations. If someone's coordinating attacks on American forces through Taliban proxies, I want to know who and why. And where, Reynolds added. If they're providing this level of tactical training and equipment, they must have bases of operation training facilities. Sullivan nodded. I'll coordinate with intelligence at Bagram. If there's a pattern to be found, we'll find it. As they returned to the command center, a commotion at the entrance caught their attention. A medical team rushed in, accompanying a stretcher bearing a man in civilian clothes, his face ashen beneath a layer of dust and dried blood. Who's that? Harrison demanded as they approached. Captain Lewis hurried over. State Department analyst Dr. James Whitaker. QRF found him hiding in a drainage culvert 2 kilometers from Wolf Team's original position. Apparently, he escaped during the initial ambush and evaded capture. Harrison's expression sharpened. The same analyst Donovan's team was sent to extract the one we thought was already evacuated. Yes, sir, Lewis confirmed. He's suffering from exposure and dehydration, but otherwise uninjured. Harrison and Reynolds exchanged a significant look. If Whitaker wasn't with Donovan's team when they were ambushed, then who was the primary target of the operation? I need to speak with him immediately, Harrison said, moving toward the medical area. Reynolds followed, a growing sense of unease building within her. The pieces of this puzzle weren't fitting together cleanly anymore. Whitaker lay on a medical cot, an IV running into his arm as doctors assessed his condition. Despite his exhaustion, his eyes were alert, darting between Harrison and Reynolds as they approached. Dr. Whitaker, Harrison began. I'm Commander Harrison, SEAL Team 6. This is Captain Reynolds. We need to ask you some questions about what happened during the ambush. Whitaker nodded weakly. They knew we were coming. Precise timing, precise positioning. Like they could see our playbook. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. I got separated from the team during the initial contact, heard them being pushed toward the valley. Couldn't risk trying to reach them, would have given away my position. You did the right thing, Harrison assured him. What can you tell us about the Taliban commander who orchestrated this? Did you see or hear anything that might identify him or his backers? Whitaker's eyes darted around the room before settling back on Harrison. Not Taliban, at least not entirely. There was a Westerner directing them. Heard him on a radio when I was hiding. American accent using military terminology. Reynolds felt a chill run through her. American, or someone trained to sound American, Whitaker qualified. He was calling in positions directing the ambush in real time. Called in something about Eagle Down when your team got separated. Harrison's expression darkened. Eagle Down is a code phrase for a compromised SEAL element. It's not something widely known outside special operations communities. Whitaker nodded weakly. That's why I remembered it. Seemed wrong. His eyes began to flutter, the exhaustion and medication taking effect. The financial trail leads to a company called Aegis Global Security, private military contractors, former special forces operators, training programs in Pakistan. His voice trailed off as he lost consciousness, the doctor stepping forward to adjust his IV. He needs rest, Commander. You can continue questioning when he's stabilized. Harrison nodded, gesturing for Reynolds to follow him back to the command center. Sullivan, he called as they entered. I need everything we have on a PMC called Aegis Global Security, and I want a secure channel to General Mitchell immediately. As Sullivan hurried to comply, Reynolds studied Harrison's expression. You think this goes beyond a rogue PMC training Taliban fighters? I think, Harrison replied quietly. We're looking at a deliberate campaign to compromise special operations missions in this region. And if Whitaker is right about American involvement, we have a serious problem on our hands. The next several hours passed in a blur of intelligence gathering, secure communications, and tactical planning. By the time the sun began to rise over the mountains, Reynolds found herself standing on the airfield, watching as a C-17 transport aircraft descended toward the runway. Harrison stood beside her, his expression grim but determined. General Mitchell has authorized an immediate investigation into Aegis Global Security and its potential connection to recent tactical compromises. The transport is bringing a replacement A-10 squadron element for forward deployment. Reynolds glanced at him in surprise. A-10's here, specifically requested, Harrison confirmed. With you as squadron commander for the forward element, 3 aircraft, 6 pilots, full maintenance crew. The implications weren't lost on Reynolds. Something significant was building a response to the events of the previous night that extended far beyond a simple rescue mission. How long before we move on this, architect? She asked. Intelligence is still developing the picture. We need to be certain before we act. Harrison turned to face her directly. In the meantime, I need you to get that squadron operational as quickly as possible. Whatever's coming, I want Ghost Rider and her pilots ready to respond. The C-17 touched down, its massive form dwarfing the modest airstrip. As its rear ramp lowered, Reynolds could see the first of the A-10s being prepared for offloading, its distinctive silhouette, unmistakable even in the aircraft's cavernous interior. Ready to get back in the cockpit officially, Captain? Harrison asked. Reynolds watched as ground crews began to assemble, preparing to receive the incoming aircraft and personnel. After 2 years of exile, after one night that had changed everything, she was being handed not just redemption, but responsibility on a scale she hadn't anticipated. Yes, sir, she replied with quiet conviction. But this time I'm not flying alone. 3 days later, Reynolds stood in the newly expanded operations center at Outpost Condor, surrounded by the pilots and support personnel of what had been unofficially dubbed Ghost Squadron. The base had transformed almost overnight, reinforced with additional security elements and expanded facilities to accommodate the A-10 detachment. The tactical display showed intelligence overlays spanning eastern Afghanistan and western Pakistan, with particular focus on remote areas where training facilities might operate undetected. Donovan had been transferred back to Outpost Condor against medical advice, but with the backing of General Mitchell, who wanted him directly involved in planning the response to the emerging threat. The financial network Whitaker uncovered extends through these regions, Donovan explained from his wheelchair, pointing to highlighted areas on the map. Multiple shell companies, all eventually linking back to Aegis Global Security. The interesting part is that Aegis itself appears legitimate on paper government contracts, corporate security work training programs for allied military forces. Harrison studied the display, a perfect cover for building a shadow operation. Use the legitimate business to establish presence and credentials while running a separate deniable program to train and equip Taliban forces. But why, one of Reynolds' newly arrived pilots asked. What's the endgame for a Western PMC collaborating with Taliban elements? Chaos by design, Sullivan suggested grimly. Destabilize the region, demonstrate the failure of American military efforts, then position yourself as the solution. There's money in prolonged conflict, Donovan added. Billions in security contracts, reconstruction efforts, equipment sales. Peace is bad for business if your business is war. Reynolds looked it up from the intelligence report she'd been studying, and if you can demonstrate that conventional military forces are ineffective against your trained proxies, you position yourself as the essential alternative. The private military corporation becomes more valuable than the standing military. Harrison nodded slowly. A demonstration that required a high-value target like a SEAL team conducting a sensitive extraction. Which explains the elaborate trap, Donovan concluded. The entire operation was designed to showcase the vulnerability of our tactics against their trained forces. Reynolds turned to Harrison. The question is, how do we respond? If we're right about Aegis and this architect, they're likely already adapting their strategy based on what happened 3 nights ago. That's why we're not waiting for them to adjust, Harrison replied, nodding to Sullivan, who activated a new display. Intelligence has identified 3 potential training facilities in this region of Pakistan, just across the border. Satellite imagery shows increased activity at all 3 locations over the past 48 hours, equipment being moved, personnel relocating. They're expecting us to come after them, Donovan observed. Yes, Harrison agreed, but they're expecting a conventional response drone strikes, possibly a covert SEAL insertion to gather intelligence. What they're not expecting is this. The display shifted to show an operation plan unlike anything Reynolds had seen before, a coordinated air-ground assault involving A-10s as the primary offensive element, supported by SEAL teams for targeting and battle damage assessment. Operation Broken Architect, Harrison explained, a direct strike against all 3 facilities simultaneously, with Ghost Squadron providing close air support and offensive capabilities. The objective is not just to destroy the facilities, but to capture key personnel, particularly anyone who might lead us to the architect himself. Reynolds studied the plan with growing respect for its audacity. This crosses the Pakistani border. We'd be operating without host nation approval. General Mitchell has secured presidential authorization for a limited incursion, Harrison confirmed, classified as a counterterrorism operation based on direct threat to American forces. When, Reynolds asked simply, 48 hours from now. Dawn insertion, your A-10s providing initial suppression, followed by SEAL fast rope deployment from MH-60s. Harrison looked around the room. I don't need to emphasize the sensitive nature of this operation. If we're right about Aegis and their connections, we're going against an organization with potential links to both foreign and domestic intelligence communities. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just planning a strike against Taliban proxies. They were potentially moving against a shadow operation with ties to elements within their own government's contractor network. Questions, Harrison prompted. Reynolds raised a hand. Sir, what's our ROE regarding Aegis personnel if encountered American contractors in a hostile fire situation presents complex legal considerations? ROE is clear, Harrison replied firmly. Any personnel, regardless of nationality, who engage our forces with hostile fire are legitimate targets. However, emphasis is on capture when possible, particularly those in leadership positions. Sullivan added, Intelligence believes most Aegis operational personnel in theater are foreign nationals, South African former Eastern Bloc, some British SAS veterans. Any Americans are likely at the strategic level, not on the ground at these facilities. Reynolds nodded, satisfied with the clarification. She turned to her pilots, who had been absorbing the briefing with professional intensity. All right, Ghost Squadron, we have 48 hours to prepare. I want weapons checks, mission rehearsals, and coordination with SEAL elements established by end of day. Any pilot not completely familiar with NOE flying in mountainous terrain needs to notify me immediately for additional training. As the group dispersed to begin preparations, Donovan wheeled himself over to where Reynolds stood, examining the target facilities in greater detail. "Just like old times," he said quietly. "You in the air, us on the ground, impossible odds." Reynolds smiled faintly. "The Helmand operation wasn't exactly a textbook success, Wolf. We both paid prices for that one." "Worth every cost," Donovan replied without hesitation. 14 operators came home because you made the right call that day." He glanced around the operations center, now humming with purposeful activity. "And now you've got a whole squadron to command. Ghost Rider leading Ghost Squadron. Poetic. Let's hope this operation has a cleaner outcome." Reynolds said, her expression growing serious. "Whoever this architect is, he's sophisticated, well-resourced, and clearly has insider knowledge of our tactics. That makes him more dangerous than any Taliban commander we've faced." Donovan nodded grimly. "The most dangerous enemies are the ones who know you from the inside out." He glanced toward Harrison, who was engaged in intense discussion with Sullivan across the room. "The commander's putting a lot of faith in you and your pilots. That's not something he does lightly." Reynolds followed his gaze, considering the man who had taken the extraordinary risk of letting her fly 3 nights ago. "He's a good officer. Puts his people first." "The best kind," Donovan agreed. "Just don't disappoint him, Kate. He's sticking his neck out with this operation going directly after Aegis when we still don't have absolute confirmation of their involvement." "We won't let him down," Reynolds promised. The preparation for Operation Broken Architect consumed the next 2 days. Reynolds worked relentlessly with her pilots, ensuring each understood their role in the complex mission. Simulator runs, weapons checks, coordination meetings with SEAL elements. Every hour was filled with purposeful activity. On the eve of the operation, Reynolds found herself on the airfield conducting a final inspection of her A-10. The aircraft gleamed in the setting sun, freshly painted, with her old call sign stenciled beneath the canopy Ghost Rider. "She looks ready," Harrison said, approaching from behind. Reynolds turned, nodding in agreement. "All 3 birds are at 100% combat readiness. My pilots are as prepared as they can be for this kind of operation." Harrison stood beside her, both of them contemplating the aircraft in companionable silence for a moment. "You know," he finally said, "when I asked if there were any combat pilots in that room 3 nights ago, I never expected what would follow." Reynolds smiled slightly. "Sometimes the most important decisions are the ones we make in moments of crisis. Like your decision in Helmand Province or your decision not to intervene during Red Wings." The questions caught her off guard with their directness. "Both decisions shaped who I am," she admitted. "One I regret, one I don't, though both had consequences I had to face." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "The burden of command, making choices when there are no good options, only less terrible ones." He turned to face her directly. "I've reviewed both incidents in detail since learning your history. For what it's worth, I believe you made the right call in Helmand, and I understand why you followed orders during Red Wings, even if the outcome was tragic." "Thank you, sir," Reynolds replied quietly, surprised by how much his assessment meant to her. "Tomorrow's operation carries similar weights," Harrison continued. "We're operating in Pakistani airspace without authorization, striking facilities based on intelligence that, while compelling, isn't absolutely conclusive. If we're wrong, the diplomatic fallout will be severe. And if we're right, we may uncover a conspiracy that extends beyond a rogue PMC training Taliban fighters." Harrison's expression was grave. "The question that keeps me awake is why? What's the strategic objective behind destabilizing our operations in this region? Who benefits from demonstrating American vulnerability?" Reynolds considered this, connecting pieces of the puzzle they'd been assembling. Someone positioning for the next phase of the conflict. Someone who wants to prove that traditional military approaches are failing and that their alternative, perhaps private military solutions, is the only viable path forward. "Precisely," Harrison agreed. "And tomorrow we either validate that theory or discover we've been chasing shadows." He extended his hand. "Either way, I'm glad Ghost Rider is leading this squadron." Reynolds accepted the handshake, feeling the weight of command and responsibility settling on her shoulders, not as a burden this time, but as a mantle she was ready to bear. 0400 briefing, Harrison reminded her. "Get some rest, Captain. Tomorrow we make history one way or another." As he walked away, Reynolds turned back to her aircraft, running her hand along its fuselage, with familiar affection. 2 years ago, she had lost everything because she chose to follow her conscience rather than her orders. Now she was being asked to lead others into a similar crucible of decision and consequence. But this time she wasn't alone. This time she had a commander who understood the complex calculus of combat decisions, a team that trusted her judgment, a mission that could make a difference beyond a single firefight or rescue operation. Ghost Rider had indeed returned from the dead, and tomorrow Ghost Squadron would write a new chapter in the shadows of honor that defined their service. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Reynolds offered a silent prayer, not for success, not for safety, but for clarity. The clarity to know the right decision when the moment came, as it inevitably would. The clarity that had guided her over Helmand Province and had abandoned her during Operation Red Wings. The clarity that would determine whether Operation Broken Architect became a footnote in military history or the beginning of something much larger than any of them yet realized. Morning would come soon enough, and with it, the wings of redemption or reckoning.